As I write this, it's early July. This story took place at the beginning of summer. I usually try to hang around my college town or travel to Europe in the summer as a way to avoid going home, but that wasn't a possibility this time around. I found myself reluctantly returning home at the beginning of the summer. I just had to make it through 1 week, and then I'd be on a plane to Germany. I didn't really feel like seeing any of my old friends, but I wasn't too keen on staying home either. So, I found myself waking up early and spending my entire days hiking, watching movies, or even just driving around aimlessly. It was my last day home. I was getting bored of the stuff I had been doing and wanted to do something a little more exciting. My friends and I used to train hop, one of the many unruly activities that I had since cut out of my life. I decided, what the hell, and drove to a secluded set of tracks I knew about. Freight trains always passed through here, so I knew there would be many options. The tracks were surrounded by trees and various flora, part of the reason I had chosen them. The last thing I needed was to be caught for doing an illegal activity after having been clean for so many years. I parked my car and made my way over to the tracks. Let me describe the layout so it's easy to understand. This specific set of tracks ran through the trees for a while before entering a tunnel. There was a very small clearing on the other side of the tunnel and then a massive bridge over the water. My friends and I used to ride the train all the way across the bridge, but since it was just me, I would have no way of getting back to my car unless I felt like walking 10 miles. So, I decided that I'd hop on the train, take it through the tunnel, hop off, and get a peaceful walk back to my car. I walked along the tracks and waited for a train to pass. It was probably 3 or 4 in the afternoon. Finally, after about 10 minutes of walking, I started to feel the familiar vibration in the rails. I quickly ran to the side and tried my best to stay out of sight. Usually, as far as I know, freight train conductors didn't care enough to report people walking along the tracks, but I didn't want to take any chances. The train passed, and I waited for a good number of cars to go by before emerging from my hiding spot. I picked a car that looked easily attainable and began jogging alongside the train like I had done 100 times before. Once I was confident enough, I grabbed hold of the ladder and swung myself up. It was pretty easy, the train wasn't traveling very quickly. As my part of the train was about to enter the tunnel, I saw a strange flash of light from up ahead. I assumed it was a spark from the train or something, but truth be told, I had never seen anything like it before. I hoped there wasn't an errant wire or something dangerous in the tunnel, but it was too late to hop off. The train started picking up speed since the tunnel was perfectly straight, and I closed my eyes as the adrenaline rush started coming on. Just then, I felt a hand reach out from the darkness and literally grab my leg. I lost my footing and nearly slipped, but my hands were firmly gripping the train. I screamed and kicked, but the train sped by before I could make contact with anything. Before I could even comprehend what just happened, I felt another hand slap against my leg. I screamed again before scrambling up the ladder, hopefully out of reach. My heart was racing. What the hell just happened? The train exited the tunnel, and I hopped off without thinking. I waited for the train to completely pass and watched it chug over the bridge. I remember pacing back and forth in the little clearing, thinking about what just happened. Like, were there really people in the tunnel, and what could they possibly be doing there? Why the hell would they try to drag me down? All these thoughts and more were racing through my mind when a stark realization struck me in the face. The only way back to my car was through the tunnel. There was absolutely no chance in hell I was walking back through that tunnel with those people in there, especially since they'd be able to see my silhouette and I'd be walking through darkness. I sat on the ground for what felt like forever. There was no other option. I couldn't walk across the bridge without risking my life. A train could come along at any second, and the bridge was too long. I considered calling someone to come rescue me, but I wasn't even sure if they'd be able to do anything. Police weren't an option. I was breaking the law just being here. I had no choice. I picked up a rock and started making my way through the tunnel. There were 2 people in there, which I knew for a fact, but there could have been more. I had no idea. I got about halfway to the point where I felt the second set of hands when I heard something. A faint click was coming from somewhere in the tunnel. It sounded like a human clicking their tongue, but it could have been made by a machine. It was honestly hard to tell. I froze and thought to myself, continuing to walk this tunnel was a death sentence. I felt a rush of confidence and pulled out my phone. "You better stay back, or I'll shoot," I threatened, my words echoing off the tunnel walls. There was a moment of silence. The clicking stopped as quickly as it had begun. I was obviously bluffing about having a gun, but I figured it was better to bluff than just walk in silence. I then pulled up a video on YouTube of gunshot sound effects, turned up my phone's volume, and played it. It was honestly louder than I was expecting, and with the echo of the tunnel, I prayed to God that whoever was in there bought it. Without waiting another second, I sprinted full speed into the darkness, bracing myself for a fight. I didn't stop running until I had reached the other side. By some miracle, no one tried to grab me. After making it out of the tunnel, I looked back. There was another flash from deep in the tunnel. This time, though, it subsided long enough for me to clearly see 2 silhouettes standing on the tracks facing me. That was it for me. I turned to leave, but as I was jogging away, the nastiest screech I've ever heard emanated from the tunnel. It sounded barbaric, definitely human, but far from normal. I don't plan on ever train hopping again. The New York City subway system is a scary place. I've been an MTA worker for 7 years, and nothing really surprises me anymore. When friends and family ask if I have any stories, though, there is one that stands out among the rest, one that I can't explain. This happened to me about 2 years into the job, but I remember it like it was yesterday. I was pretty acclimated to everything at that point, and things had become routine. I was stationed in Brooklyn at the time, and I was doing some routine maintenance in High Street Station. There wasn't a soul on the platform. It was actually kind of eerie. You're used to these subway stations overflowing with people, so seeing them empty and almost deserted looking was a strange adjustment to make. I hadn't seen a person on the platform in hours, and it was dead silent except for the buzz of the lights and the occasional passing train. Out of nowhere, I heard a clang from somewhere down the track. It startled me so badly that I dropped my mop in shock. The sound wasn't something I was used to hearing. The best way I could describe it to you is that sound that a rock would make if it had been dropped on a metal rail. I stopped what I was doing and looked into the tunnel, listening for other noises. After a while, I concluded that whatever I heard had either been caused by an animal or a falling piece of cement. After all, these stations were pretty old. I went back to work, not thinking too much about the sound. About 10 minutes later, the same sound shook me from my concentration. Only this time, it was probably about twice as loud. This time, I actually became a little concerned, dare I say, scared. Was it really possible that 2 chunks of the ceiling had fallen in the span of 10 minutes? I put down my supplies and walked over to the tunnel entrance, trying to be quiet. I peered into the darkness and couldn't really see anything. I debated whether or not it was a good idea to call out into the tunnel and ultimately decided against it. I still figured it was nothing, but after the initial fear had worn off, I was more confused than anything. I kept trying to think of things that could make a sound like that, not once, but twice. It was especially bizarre since the second sound was louder. I tried to keep my mind off the sounds and went back to work, finding a good rhythm again. I was almost done with my work on this platform and was pleased that I'd get to leave this weird station soon. As I was wrapping things up, I heard something that gave me the chills. A child's voice called out for help from inside the tunnel, and he sounded like he was in distress. I instantly stopped what I was doing and made my way over to the edge of the platform. I hesitated for a few seconds before deciding that a child in anguish wasn't something my moral conscience would allow me to ignore. I walked down the steps leading onto the tracks and waited for my eyes to adjust to the darkness. I shouted into the tunnel, asking the kid if he was okay. No response. That's weird, I thought, starting to feel nervous about this encounter. Just then, the kid's voice rang out again, repeating his call for help. I yelled back, asking him if he could hear me. He responded, yes, and I asked where specifically he was. There was a brief moment of silence before he just said, in front of you. Just keep walking. I really didn't want to, but couldn't just leave some helpless kid all alone on those tracks. It was dangerous. I began walking forward when something dawned on me. I yelled into the darkness one more time, this time asking the kid what was wrong. An uncomfortable pause again before the kid responded, just keep walking. I didn't like that. This whole thing was off. My eyes finally adjusted to the darkness, and I was able to slightly make out what was in front of me. There actually was what looked like the shadow of a kid just up the tracks, but there was something else that almost made me scream in fear, another shadow, this one much taller, obviously an adult. My blood ran cold, and I stopped in place. This wasn't happening to me. As slowly as I could, I turned around and made my way back to the platform. Luckily, I wasn't chased on the way back. The kid shouted, "Wait, where are you going?" once I reached the platform, but I wasn't sticking around another second. I made my way up the stairs and called the police as soon as I got cell service. I told them everything, and police were swarming the platform in a matter of minutes. I waited to see what they turned up. After about 30 minutes of searching, they did find something chilling. There was a single kid shoe just lying in the tunnel, which the police hypothesized could have signified a struggle. After hours more of searching and scouring every available database for missing children, we were told we'd receive a call if anything ever came up. It was concluded that whoever had been down there, though, had hidden somewhere in the tunnels. I have no idea what to think of this experience. This is the best theory I can come up with. Some psycho kidnapped a child and forced him to yell for help in an attempt to lure some unsuspecting Good Samaritan into a trap. Or hell, maybe it's their own kid who they're raising to also be a psycho. I can't think of any other reasonable explanation besides this one. But if I'm right, I can only imagine what that kid must be going through. My dad has been an MTA transit subway station manager for 35 years. With this job, there has to be a manager on duty at all times, so he's practically done every single possible shift throughout his career. That means he's done his fair share of night shifts. Most trains were completely empty throughout the night. He said it was the only nice part about doing the night shift. He has a series of funny and weird night shift stories to tell, but there's one downright horrifying one. My dad had just boarded the train to move to his office at another station. He was alone when he got on, which was at about 2 o'clock in the morning. At the next station, someone boarded. My dad describes him as a white, tall, and skinny man wearing a heavy jacket and beanie. He shot my dad a quick glance before sitting in the farthest corner away from him. My dad said that he felt uncomfortable as the guy kept looking up at him every so often. When my dad's stop came, he got off, as well as the other man. He walked to his office door, unlocked it, and looked behind him. The man in the jacket was pacing around only about 50 feet away. My dad stepped into his office, shut the door, locked it, and sat at his desk. 5 minutes later, someone started to try and turn the doorknob. After the person on the other side of the door realized it was locked, they started to knock softly. My dad called out, "Who is it?" and they responded, "I want to talk." He told whoever it was to go away. He says he knew trouble when he saw it. He had a good feeling it was the guy from the train, as this station at a time like this was apparently always completely empty. My dad told the guy to go away. He continued to knock for a good 5 minutes. My dad finally pulled up the security camera screens and brought up the camera pointed at his office door. Sure enough, it was the guy from the train, wearing the jacket and beanie. Coincidentally, as soon as my dad brought up the camera, the man walked away. So, my dad did whatever his work consisted of for about half an hour in that office before leaving to catch the next train. He checked the camera to make sure that the weird guy wasn't out there. He locked up and walked down the stairs to the train platform, where he got on the train right away. Looking out the window, he saw the guy from before walking down the stairs to the platform and then stepping on the train into the same car as my dad. He sat down on the opposite side, a few seats to the right. My dad tried to look away and pretend not to notice him, but he knew the guy was staring at him. He at one point gave in and stared back, giving a slight nod and smile in some sort of truce attempt before looking away again. The man stared at my dad the whole ride to the next station, but my dad never looked back at him once after the first time. Now, you may be asking, why didn't he try to forcibly get the guy to back off? Well, despite my dad's intimidating size, he's always been a complete teddy bear, no bark and no bite. Plus, he says he feared that the guy was armed and that one small motion could lead to death. When the train stopped at the station, my dad practically ran all the way back up to the streets, constantly glancing over his shoulder. And yes, the man from the train was following him. My dad had to find the first public building still open to try and escape. He found a Wendy's that was open and stepped inside. He sat and watched as the guy following him walked up to the window, stopped, and stared my dad down through the glass for about 10 seconds before turning around and walking across the street and then down the sidewalk. My dad said he ate, waited a little longer, then left the Wendy's to get to his third and final station for the night. The scariest part, when my dad was in his third office, as he was checking the security cameras out of paranoia of the situation, he caught the guy from the train pacing around the outside only about 30 feet from his office. He then stopped, looked up at the camera, and, according to my dad, literally froze and stared for no less than a minute. When he finally lowered his head, he walked away out of the station to never be seen by my dad again. My dad doesn't know if he was followed after leaving the Wendy's, but that would only make sense. The guy was clearly disturbed, possibly homeless, or dangerous. Who knows what he actually wanted with my dad? New York City trains are pretty crazy. I've been groped and harassed, and I've seen things that I don't ever want to see again. My best friend and I were neighbors living in Upper Manhattan. It was summertime, and it was pretty late. It was around 8:30-ish, and we wanted to go to the west side to get some milkshakes because we always liked to go out late for little adventures. Of course, my parents didn't want us to go out late, but we kept pushing it, and we ended up going. In order to get to where we wanted to go, we had to take the subway. As we're coming back, it was already 9:30-ish, so we expected to get back home around 10. The train arrived, and my best friend and I hopped in. The train car was empty, so we sat on the chairs with 2 seats. As we arrived at the next stop, a man came into the same car. We didn't think anything of it until the man sat right across from us. Keep in mind, the train car was nearly empty, and he could have picked literally any other seat but decided to sit across from us. Of course, my friend and I thought that was weird, so we texted each other saying we were going to move to the next car when we got to the next stop. As we were heading to the next stop, we quickly ran out of the train and ran to a different car. We just kind of laughed it off until our smiles slowly turned into worried faces when we saw the same man coming into the new car we had just moved to. Obviously, my friend and I felt completely uncomfortable. We moved all the way down to the opposite end of the car, and the man did the same exact thing. Keep in mind, the man himself didn't look creepy. He looked pretty average, which honestly made me really surprised. But my friend and I quickly moved to the next car once we got to the next stop. We were pretty scared because we were only 15 years old, and we were females on a subway. Train going back home alone around 10 o'clock. I don't really remember how we lost the man, but luckily we did. We quickly ran back home after we got off our stop, also making sure we weren't being followed. We didn't tell our parents because we knew they wouldn't let us out again, so we just kept it to ourselves. Nothing crazy like this ever happened again to us, but now we know to be more careful taking the subway home. For anyone that comes to New York and takes the subway, please be careful because you really never know who's gonna follow you. I'm a student in Rome and I live about 2 hours away from it, so whenever I have to go there, I have to go by train. I do have my driver's license, but I prefer the train because I can study on the way there. Plus, in Italy, it's quite common for students to move by train to reach the cities where we study. So, this one day in question, I was waiting at the train station in Roma Tiburtina with my boyfriend for my train to come. This is one of those times where I would get on the train by myself because he had an extra lesson the following day, so he was just keeping me company. We both noticed a weird guy with a bike acting strange, like he was drunk or something, but we didn't pay much attention because the station is often full of drunk homeless people roaming around. Here's why he never lets me go alone to the station, especially at night. So, we sat and waited for my train, and when it finally arrived, I got up, kissed my boyfriend goodbye, and got on the train. I did notice the guy with the bike standing in line behind me to get on the train, but I honestly didn't give it that much thought. After all, lots of people took my same train, and there were often drunk people trying to board without a ticket. When I got on the train, it was packed. No matter how many carriages I passed, I couldn't find a seat, so I just sighed and decided to go sit by the train door. I don't know about other countries, but here in Italy, some trains have a little seat by the door that you can unfold. So, I unfolded one of those and sat there, taking out my history book and starting my long study session. About 5 minutes into my studying, I felt something on my cheek. It was a hand. I raised my gaze from my book, and there he was, the guy with the bike. I immediately jerked his hand away from my face and asked, who are you and what do you want? He simply just stood there smiling, so I asked again, who are you? He then looked me dead in the eyes, still with that creepy grin, and said, I'm no one. I'm just a dude. Wanna have some fun? I didn't even bother answering. I just started picking up my stuff to leave, but then he put his arm right in front of me, blocking my way into the carriage. So, I grabbed his wrist, dug my nails into it, and then jerked it away, freeing my passage to the much more crowded carriage where he couldn't do anything to me. I tried to look for the ticket inspector to get some help, but he just kept following me. One very kind man noticed the creep was following me, so he offered me a seat and told me to stay there while he went to look for the inspector. I sat down and waited. I honestly thought that I was safe, that he wouldn't try to do anything in front of so many people, but I was wrong. He started going back and forth along the corridor of the carriage, and every time he passed me, he would try to touch me. He would caress my shoulder or face or even try to go to my breasts, despite the fact that I kept jerking his hands away. Everybody just watched and said nothing, absolutely nothing, to help me. After a while, the man came back with the ticket inspector and the creep ran away in the opposite direction. The inspector came up to me, and I showed him a picture of the dude that I'd managed to take, telling him that he was following me and touching me. So, the inspector went after the creep and eventually caught him a few carriages forward. He then proceeded to call the police. The police came to the next station, and while waiting, the creep was placed near his bike by the door with the inspector constantly watching him. At the train station, 2 officers had to literally lift him out of the train because he was resisting, saying that we were friends and that I obviously liked his attention. But he got arrested anyway. And the worst part of all this, no one even dared to help me on that train when he was trying to touch me in front of everyone. There was even a woman who said I must have done something to turn him on. So, even though I was just a student minding my own business, just sitting there looking at my books, in her mind, I must have done something to turn him on. Still to this day, I can't believe I was the one being blamed for his creepy behavior. Seriously, what the? Thanks for watching the video. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to watch the latest videos.